So this is discussion number 3. We'll be discussing code of ethics and transparency. Transparent language, transparency, I think, is something that is yet to be fully defined, and something I hope that we can tackle today during our breakout discussions. Just excuse me while I get my bearings here. Okay. So for today's agenda, I would like to provide some feedback from, or a synthesis of the feedback that we received from the first 2 discussions, then go into the topics for today, which is code of ethics and transparency, a little review of the ground rules, and take a poll. Actually, that should be a singular poll. And then we'll do our breakout discussions, which will be led by each member of the Autry team, Alejandra Gaeta, Cristina Homocola, and Lillian Posadas. And then I'll stay in the main room in case anybody wants to come back to the main room, or people for latecomers. And then after the breakout sessions, we will reconvene in the main room. You will get, I think, like a 1-minute, 2-minute warning. And then I also want to go over that, the demographics of who shows up to these public discussions and what we're trying to do to really get like comprehensive feedback. So from the first discussion, it was attended by mostly non-tribally affiliated representatives, 88%. I just realized I should have given like the full number of the overall number of people that came. I think we did break out into 3 groups, and I think each group had about 15-ish people. So 45, let's say, for the first group, for the first discussion. The response from that, one of the responses we have from that is to make sure that in our workbook that we talk about who provided feedback, what demographics, what entities, and how we got the feedback. So a little bit about this community authorship or community suggestions. When I say community, meaning like, I should say like maybe open community, or in a way some sort of crowdsourcing. But we do try to reach out to as many different communities as possible. A lot of the feedback from the first discussion, and again, we talked about the introduction of the workbook, our resources related to PNAAM and NAGPRA, that we should probably think about expanding the idea of NAGPRA or nodding to other elements that are not NAGPRA, such as the Smithsonian has another set of laws that they go by. We also had feedback regarding the wording and the definition of it, and then looking at alternative policies for non-federally recognized tribes. There was comments about a lot of text, that this is a workbook and there's a lot of text and could be daunting, especially for those that are just using this resource to get to know and get familiarized with the work and to do the work. So that there have been comments about having something more visual or a diagram, and then additional sections to address the sovereignty of Indigenous nations, discussions on colonialism, colonizing, decolonizing, and various definitions, historical background of why we need something like this, or historical background of these types of relations was suggested in more than one comment. Types of repatriation. I was speaking to a colleague of mine at the Autry, and he referred to it as repatriation with a big R, capital R, and repatriation with a small r. So repatriation that goes outside of NAGPRA, more on Indigenous epistemology and language addressing the intangible cultural heritage, and as well as the tangible. After the discussion number 2, developing tribal relations, a comment on building trust. Can't build trust, but you can build relationships. More of an emphasis of the sovereignty of the different tribes and how they're different. In the even the wording of how these groups will be described, or the groups will be described. So language was a big one, is to be careful of language, and to make sure that, you know, you consider various phrases, and look at more literature regarding cultural competency and empathy and humility. Talk more maybe about reciprocal relationships and gift giving. Personal rapport was mentioned in both of the notes for both the discussion groups, but I also got some feedback afterwards about, you know, wanting to understand, for the tribes, wanting to understand who's this person that they're working with, like what is their background. I thought a really good suggestion is having language about the tendency for the non-Native institutions have a tendency to ask for free labor, and to look at building protocols that address remuneration, stipends, consultation fees, etc. And then also from this, maybe building some sort of advocacy template that these groups can go to their board to justify the support of such protocols and activities. There's mention of looking at tribal IRBs and examples of what collaborations look like. The idea of legal counsel, and where legal counsel might or might need or have to come in. And then overall, are we getting away from this idea of a workbook, of it being a workable, practical resource? Which I think is a very valid question, because like I said, it is at this stage, I see that the workbook draft is more like a resource right now, but I think that collating as much feedback and as much resource and people's input as possible, and then maybe we'd be more informed as we whittle down to make it more of a practical workbook, or maybe there might be a workbook section in the front, and everything that we gathered from this is just like a resources section, like a huge appendix. Just a reminder that the goal is simple, to be a practical resources that focuses on the intersecting activities between NAGPRA and PNAAM. As suggested, of having visuals, you know, what does that mean? So I came up with this Venn-like diagram to kind of capture sort of the conversations as well as the project goal. So we have repatriation on one side and all its various definitions. In PNAAM, they even mention a phrase, knowledge repatriation, which is like, you know, all the records and information that institutions, especially non-tribal institutions, have about particular items, you know, making sure that they share that knowledge. If it's not full repatriation, maybe defined by some, digital return is also used, but then there's the laws of NAGPRA, right, that sits within there. So this workbook is supposed to tackle that teeny tiny sliver that encompasses archives, like the items, the materials, and the archive administration, which is the management of those materials, which includes access and accessibility, and making them available in a particular way in regards to these types of activities. So, you know, purposefully, because this grant is modest, we did mean for it to just like capture this small sliver with the hope that it can expand, that other people, that this would garner more conversations and support the need for something like this, that can then, this workbook work that we're doing goes into like a bigger project that expands worlds. The other thing that was asked is like, where, you know, where would archives and archive administration fall into the different steps of NAGPRA. So I looked at various sources, mostly online, to see if I can get just sort of a concise step-by-step, what are the steps of the NAGPRA process? And this was from the University of Michigan. And Feel free, if you are if you are a THPO officer or a NAGPRA coordinator or work with NAGPRA more in depth than I do not, to kind of to chime in this section. But from my experience, when I've been requested or the Autry has been requested to have collections available for tribal consultation related to NAGPRA, it's during the beginning steps in submitting a claim, inventories, resources, background research is needed. So making the information that we have in our libraries and archives available for that, for step one, to consultation, of course, to review of evidence. And then I'm not as quite sure with 4, 5, and 6, but I know at the very beginning, when it comes to anything relating to research, archives are always a part of it. And then I have a question about compliance. Federal agencies and museums are local governments, anyone taking federally funded, or any entity taking federally funded federal funds, I should say, are compliant to NAGPRA. So inventory, so these institutions have to supply, right, inventories and summaries. And I know it's still questioned if archives are subjected to NAGPRA. I think, there isn't any precedents that say archives are, but does that mean that we don't, if we are archival library, that we don't supply some sort of inventory summary, taking a cue from NAGPRA structure to look to create some sort of inventory of things that might be at least culturally sensitive. PNAAM suggests, that suggests that still and moving images, recordings and transcripts, maps, cartographic materials, records, ephemera, paper materials, including dissertations and thesis, and previous published texts could also contain culturally sensitive material. At this point, I would like to open it up to Lillian, to anybody else, if they have any comments of what I've just said about the feedback, or if you did come to one of the two previous discussions, or two previous discussions, if there's anything I missed and you would like to add or just stress a point. You can put it in chat or raise your hand, and I'll have, if one of my team members can can look at that, because I can't see chat as easily. Any? Okay. Well, I didn't hear anything, so I'll just move on. Oh, yeah?
One question that just came into the chat. Laura Lee Masava Ramani asks, does recording include music / other voice recordings?
Yeah, oral histories, voice recordings. So if you go to the PNAAM website, it does give examples of under each. Of course, it had limited space, but yeah, I think anything that's a recording, visual, audio, visual, sound.
And then we have another comment saying, I'm on contract in a National Park Service archive currently. I will track down one of our NAGPRA reps to ask about archival materials as applicable items for inventory and summary.
Great, thank you. So for today's topics, we are talking about code of ethics. My favorite definition, I think, is from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a set of rules about good and bad behavior, period. But what is considered good and what is considered bad behavior, quote unquote, right, is then turned into like bigger interpretation and language, depending on what entity is drafting the code of ethics. I got the second definition, which is a bit longer, which falls into a deeper explanation of code of ethics and its need for it. This definition is based on an organization or professional code of ethics, which talks about the mission, values, and principles and standards of professional conduct. It also, code of ethics nod to the values of the organization and the desired behavior. As a result, code of ethics can become benchmarks against which individual and organizational performance can be measured. And it's a central guide of reference for employees to look at for their day-to-day decision making. So knowing the code of ethics, you're looking at code of ethics are again, professional organizations and institutions should usually have a code of ethics. They are a set of principles. In our fields that we're looking at here for the RMP workbook, there's a lot of them do mention these ideas of access. But then I've seen a lot of other institutions add on like access with a caveat, but there's limitations to access, and the limitations of access is more localized and based on a particular case or a particular institution. It does more and more are talking about culturally sensitive items. I didn't see though much of the word repatriation in the code of ethics that we gave samples to. They do, code of ethics, like I said, also have been guiding interpersonal conduct, responsibility and responsibilities. So when looking at or thinking about your code of ethics, oh, and I should say code of ethics might also be the thing that one looks at or refers to that buys them into the profession that they're in, right? The reason why they want to go into this is because they are in alignment or somewhat inspired by the code of ethics, but it's also a place where you can look back for guidance. But I feel that people also look at the code of ethics to see where change needs to be made in a profession, right? So you'll look at your code of ethics, and as you examine that, maybe you'll think through through that examination, well, this is missing, or that needs to be changed, or what does this mean? So I think it's for in its base level, it's a point of a benchmark where you can at least examine where your profession or your institution is at, and where it sits against your personal code of ethic. So some questions to consider today is like, where do the various code of ethics that come from you from different aspects of your life, where do they align? Where do they conflict? Where's there's tension? Where does change need to be made? Is there, concerns or challenging with the prevailing terminologies or philosophies in the archive world? We talk about Western, quote unquote, Western practices, how, and PNAAM mentions like how Western traditional archive practices go against some of the principles of the protocols. How is the acknowledgement of local, federal, or tribal laws folded into ethics and value statements? Can the language in PNAAM influence the language in the code of ethics? So for instance, there is language in PNAAM about reciprocity. So is that idea of reciprocity and relationship building with the community somehow in those code of ethics? Or looking at, or when you are faced with local, federal, tribal laws or native laws, or, that might be contradictory, which one would take precedence for you in your institution? And then how could some of the guidelines also be used to craft policies utilizing transparent language? But then again, how would you define the use and purpose of transparent language? It is a phrase that is being tossed around. I hear pretty often when talking about communicating, especially when you're talking about institutions communicating with external entities. You want to have transparent language that describes what you do, advocates for what you do, and then how that affects that policy that is referring to. What, if any, do you think are the benefits of such transparent language? And is there such a thing as being too transparent? Some ground rules for discussion. We put this out before every discussion. Please, listen respectfully without interrupting. Criticize ideas, not individuals. Avoid blame, speculation, and inflammatory language, and allow everyone the chance to speak. And then if you would like, you can use your chat. Everybody will have the power to unmute themselves. So, use that with discretion, of course. But if you would rather, you could always raise your hand or chat function to ask your questions, and the room moderators will, moderate that. So before we go out into breakout rooms, I would like to launch this poll about the representation today. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and share results. So it's less than we had so our first meeting, it was 88% non-tribal affiliated, then it was 92% for the second one. This one, it's 70%, 17 tribal affiliated, and 13% other. I neglected to put the other category in our discussion in January. So for those that are other, if you'd like to speak now and discuss your affiliation or your representation, please feel free to chime in either through chat or unmuting yourself. Okay. So I see we've got an independent consultant, and feel free if it comes in conversation in your breakout rooms to also explain your particular situation. So I am going to have you go in breakout rooms now. And it's going to happen manually. And there you go. Give me a couple seconds to make sure everybody, the leaders that are, there we go. For each breakout room is assigned to different rooms. Okay, open all rooms. And I'll see you back at noon-ish. Right. What's happening? Hold on, let me do that again. Breakout rooms. Uh-oh. Okay, I pressed the wrong button, so I have to do this manually, so please bear with me. Okay. Hey, Dave. I'm going to move you.
Okay.
Huh. Okay. There you go. Oh. Huh. It's refusing to put you in a room. What? Put in a waiting room. Pin, make host. This is so interesting. Let me try again. This is so weird. You've joined. It says not joined, but you're here. Here you are in front of my face. Maybe it's just taking a while for you to connect. Aha. Hey.
Hello.
Hi. It's kicking you out of rooms for some reason.
Yeah, I was in it for a second, and then
I know. This is
somebody
so
was
weird.
introducing themselves.
Let me just send a message. Is for note taking purposes. We will be using the I have to make sure. That's so weird. It says not joined. Is there something? I'm trying to look at your put in wait, no. Hi, no. Okay. We can have a discussion, but I just need to make sure that Lillian can record. So I'm going to step out for a second, step out and then come back.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, David.
Hello, how
Okay,
you doing?
well, let me see what the breakout rooms look like. And if, I'll try one more time, but if it bounces back to me, you and I will have the discussion. Nope. It's not working. Oh. Recording. So the beginning and this part is also being recorded. Who of the three team members, Lilian, Christina, Alejandra, who would like to go first? Lilian is raising her hand.
I've got muted, but yes. All right, we'll go with that. So our group, we had really good discussion, and one thing that came up and sort of kicked off the discussion was to the first prompt about personal, professional, or field institutional code of ethics, and where there's sources of where there's areas of tension. And one area of tension was that some professional codes of ethics might, or institutional, if you're a public institution, require that there be a distribution of the research. So research that then is conducted by students or by researchers that then makes it into an archive and needs to be available to the larger public, and how when the impact that has on researchers and people who participate in research, where the focus of that research is histories that could that are sensitive histories or legal histories. That came up as there was an example about being in a in a participating in maybe a protest or something, or maybe where you could be in get into legal trouble for being there, or issues of interpersonal violence, or there could be legal trouble, or that participants could be impacted. So there were some suggestions on how to get around that, either by taking notes in those sections and making sure that the people who are being interviewed are aware of that they that they will be recorded, and to what they maybe should not be divulging in a recorded session. And then there was also recommendations that transcripts can be redacted with different levels of access to transcripts, or there can be moratoriums on research or access to this research. And there was also a suggestion of maybe involving a lawyer in some of these discussions.